Well, hello. I would encourage everybody to get up and do a little happy dance with me. 'Cause I don't know about you, but my butt's getting sore down there. Let's just do a little stretch, a little turnaround, a little hokey pokey thing. And I'm going to try and make this go quick and fun and get us out of here a few minutes early to pick up your lunches. So I guess where's the magic clicker? Here we go. So my presentation today is on housing, and I think what's really unique about housing for baby boomers and beyond is to kind of look at it from a historical perspective, because as we've done so many things, we've really expanded the options of what's available. Can you hear me in the back? Am I speaking enough? Okay. So to get started, who remembers the Andy Griffith Show? Who wanted to live in Mayberry? I thought that was a pretty cool place to live when I was about 8 or 9. And it's what's unique about Mayberry is, of course, it's a medical town. But and I forgot my little red pointer device, but it's a very livable community. Sheriff Taylor, of course, over there in the courthouse, made it really easy for Opie to be able to come home from school, get a snack with the I.mp4, go over to the courthouse, see what's hanging, and then go see what Goober was up to. And today's environment, I've got 9-year-old twins who are about the same size as Opie was on that show, maybe a little bit older. And there's no way I'd send them down to the courthouse or, well, that's kind of an interesting proposition. But even over to the theater or to church, our communities just aren't very walkable anymore. Although more and more we're going back to what we call traditionally designed neighborhoods. And it's essentially Mayberry. So what happened to Mayberry? Well, first and foremost, the automobile. Automobiles, more than any other single factor, have changed the way that we design our communities and therefore our housing. Part of that came about as a result of cheap gas prices, the mass production of cars, and of course our superhighway system, which made it easier for people to move out of the cities into the countryside and still get to work in a reasonable amount of time. Excuse me. It changed the way that we did shopping. It used to be, and in some towns still, you could kind of pull in that vertical parking space right in front of the hardware store, and within about 45 minutes or an hour, get to a pharmacy, a bookstore, a grocery shopping place, and get all your errands done in one area. Hey, wait a second, did we skip? Oh, okay. All right. So anyway, shopping centers tremendously changed the way that our communities are built. And so what we ended up with is kind of this big spread of megatropolis, which makes it really hard if you're living up here to get over to the library. There's just no easy way to get around. You got to have a car. And when you no longer have a car, guess what? You lose your independence in many cases. So what's important to think about in terms of the evolution of housing is how boomers, the 78 million strong generation that we've heard a lot about today, have been part of the progression of that change throughout their whole lifespan. So after World War II, we began with a new concept called suburbia. Before that, people pretty much lived in small towns, rural areas, or they lived in the city, in townhouses that are essentially 15 feet wide and very close together. But with the birth of suburbia, that changed a lot of what our housing stock looked like. In the 50s and 60s, we saw the growth of the suburbs. Everybody wanted to have their little plot of land, their 1,000, actually, I just found the statistic on this. In 1900, the average size of the American home was 700 feet and cost $5,000. Can you imagine? You can't even buy a car for $5,000 anymore. In 1950, we doubled it to 1,000 square feet and essentially about $11,000. In 2000, we jumped to 2,000 square feet and $200,000. What young people coming out of college are able to afford a $200,000 home? It's really, again, that has had a huge impact on the type of housing that we've created and the type of communities that we live in. In the 1950s and 1960s, the other thing that happened in housing relevant to the discussion today is we essentially had the birth of retirement communities. This was a concept that was invented by Del Webb to capitalize on the fact that people were still fairly healthy at 62, even though we only expected them, and in fact most only did, live to 65, to experience those golden years in Leisureville. So this is actually the picture down in the lower left is Sun City Center. When Sun City Center opened in Arizona, the picture above it shows they had something ridiculous, like 13,000 people come in the first weekend to look and buy up those homes. It was a wonderful, exciting concept of essentially Disney World for grown-ups. In the 1970s, we saw a major shift starting to happen to accommodate baby boomers. And there were other factors, of course, going along. We had a recession. There was a rise in single-family households. A lot of boomers didn't marry. They didn't want a house necessarily. We also saw a rise in divorce, which changed the dynamics of types of people desired for homes. And we began to see this new urban growth. The other thing that's interesting, which is a whole nother interesting conversation, is mothers began to enter the workforce. And in the 50s and 60s, that predominantly was to buy the washer or the dryer or the extras. Wasn't necessarily required, but we began to see this new trend. Then along came the 60s and the 70s. And we saw some really interesting alternative concepts in houses, from VW buses and old school buses revamped for people to live in for their summer or two, to this idea of shared housing, which I'm going to come back to in a little bit later. In the 1980s, we evolved again as boomers kind of outgrew those teepees and the desire to live communally, and started deciding that, having a good income wasn't such a bad idea. We saw a kind of rebirth of the suburbs and bigger lots, bigger homes, and also a resurgence in interest in moving back into the city, particularly into this new concept called condominiums.